Okay, right, so our final presentation for this afternoon is from Michael Jubb here, who's joining us from the Research Information Network, whose reports I've spent a huge amount of time reading. So thank you very much for those. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
As with other speakers, let me say how pleased I am to be here as part of your Open Access Week events. And I think I've been invited here mainly because I was quite closely involved as the secretary of the Finch Group, which actually met again a few weeks ago to review progress in the implementation of its recommendations over the past year, and there will be a report, a second Finch report, if you like, coming out in the next couple of weeks as a result of that review process. And let me start by saying that I hope no one in this audience needs much convincing that if we could sort of flick a switch and by magic, as it were, shift ourselves to a wholly open access scholarly communication systems tomorrow, next week, by the 1st of January, a huge number of benefits would arise from that. I think we've had an open access movement now for more than 20 years, and we're nowhere near that kind of environment. And we need to think about why it is that over the past 20 years we haven't made more progress than we have. And that's, I think, a context actually in which to think about the Finch Committee report, and I'll start by saying a little bit about that original report published back 15 months or so ago. And I think in one sense, the key message that came out of that report is summed up in its title, Accessibility, Sustainability, Excellence. All wonderful words that we can all sign up to. But there are actually, I think, some quite complex interactions and even tensions that can arise when you try to reconcile those three words. And in a way, even that is underplaying the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. If we just concentrate for a moment on journal articles, not that I'm downplaying the importance in the slightest of monographs, having been involved in writing monographs myself, if we just concentrate on those, no one would deny the incredible importance, the central place that they occupy, not just in the scholarly communications landscape, in the whole research landscape. They're important not just as mechanisms, as channels for communication, dissemination. They play a key role in quality assurance. They play a key role in quality assessment at different levels of granularity, whether that's a department, a university, or an individual level. So they play a number of different roles at different points or different roles in different parts of the research ecology, which of itself, of course, is incredibly complicated. So the question that the Finch Group was set up to address was how to expand access in a sustainable way to peer-reviewed research publications. And as I say, we concentrated for the most part on journal articles. But bearing in mind, we were set up by a range of bodies who were very conscious of the excellent performance, the excellent reputation of the UK research community. And I can give you chapter and verse on, if we have time later on the various measures through which you can demonstrate how powerful the UK research community is. And we didn't want to put that in any sense at risk. So the process then was to get a group of 13 representatives of universities, of libraries, of funders, of learned societies, which are incredibly important in this landscape, as well as publishers, not-for-profit as well as for-profit publishers. Now, I think we need to recognise from the outset that those different interest groups have different interests, different perspectives. They're not all singing precisely from the same hymn sheet, and so we quickly realised the blindingly obvious that there's no single easy solution to the problem that, as I mentioned, we've been grappling with for more than 20 years. So what we came up with was, if you like, a compromise, a best fit, something that everyone could, in one sense or other, live with. So again, trying to marry three sets of criteria. And we set up a sort of model, if you like, for testing what our success criteria might look like. So the first set of success criteria was to do with accessibility, making more of the UK production of research articles accessible globally to anyone, anywhere in the world. But there's a flip side to that. There's another side to that coin, isn't there? It's what you can do to make more of the global production of articles accessible freely to everyone in the UK. What can be done about that? Bearing in mind that the UK produces about 6% of UK authors, strictly speaking, are responsible for about 6% of the global production of articles. Excellence, high quality research, but high quality services which play an important part in sustaining that research excellence. And sustainability in terms, yes, of cash, of finance. For the publishing enterprise, and I emphasise publishing enterprise, not talking about the financial sustainability of any particular publisher, whether that be a commercial, a not-for-profit, or a learned society. But as I say, learned societies are particularly important in that. They're major publishers in their own right, particularly in the UK. But the other side of that coin, of course, is what are the costs to funders and to the HE sector as a whole, whether that's national scale funders, research charities, or indeed individual universities. To set alongside those criteria for success, what are the kinds of mechanisms you've got available? Well, certainly open access articles, open access journals, and we might argue that open access articles are more important than journals in this kind of context. Repositories clearly have an important part to play in this, but perhaps also something that hasn't much been mentioned, I think, so far today, and it's particularly important if you're thinking about access for the UK in the short term to the global output of articles? Do we need to have some kinds of extensions to current license regimes, which might be okay for most but not all universities, but certainly once you go outside the HE sector, lots of people find that they fall off a cliff in terms of the accessibility of the research literature. So, quickly, the conclusions that we reached were that none of the available mechanisms met all the success criteria on its own, and so we were likely to be living and to be recommending a mixed economy for the foreseeable future, but a mixed economy in which the transition to OA needed to be accelerated. We haven't made as much progress as we would like to do, but in a managed way. So acceleration of the process, but also management of the process. And that's because of the risks, if you like, to the different players in the system, risks to all players in the system if the process isn't managed, recognising the tensions between them, but also recognising the limitations of what can be done within the UK. As has been mentioned already, you can't draw in this world a strict boundary around the UK. And also recognising that we want to sustain a scholarly communications environment, a scholarly communications system, an ecology, if you like, which supports and promotes and encourages innovation. If, stasis is not where we want to be. We want to be in a system which is continually innovating. So the recommendations were a balanced package of moves towards green, gold, and extensions to licensing. I should emphasise, by the way, that we avoided, so far as possible in the Finch report, the use of the words green and gold, and I'm only using them now as a very crude kind of shorthand. But with a clear policy direction towards gold, for the kinds of reasons that Murray, amongst others, has already alluded to, with better funding arrangements which focus responsibility on universities rather than funders, with minimal restrictions on use and reuse, and I'll say a bit more about licensing in a moment. Development of the repository infrastructure, we recommended major investment in that. But we also recommended cautious approaches to limitations on embargoes because we recognise that in the green model, actually what you're doing at the moment is running a system which depends on the sustainability of the subscription-based journals. And putting them at undue risk was something that we thought you should think very carefully about. We also recommended that subscriptions and APCs should be dealt with in a single negotiation, recognising that the increase in costs to universities and the increase in revenues to publishers needed to be put together in a single pot, if you like. And something that, well, I'll say a bit more about this in a moment, hasn't happened very much, an expansion and rationalisation of current licensing regimes, which are very far from rational at the moment, very far from rational. I'm not going to say anything about Research Council and Funding Council policies because that's already been covered, but those of you who want to get a sort of conspectus of what's been happening in universities, particularly since the 1st of April, might be interested in reports that my organisation, the RIN, published on that a few months ago. Okay, so how's it going in response to the recommendations of the Finch report? I think an overall characterisation of how implementation is going, that a hell of a lot has changed in the last year. There is real momentum, I think, now behind moves to open access, particularly in the UK, but not just in the UK. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But the progress has been, I think we'd have to say, a bit uneven, and it's given rise to some issues that some of which have been quite difficult and some of which still remain to be resolved. And I'll come on to what some of those are in a moment. It's also been a matter of much lively, I think, debate across the blogosphere, but not just in the blogosphere. Two quite robust parliamentary inquiries with reports that have had quite vigorous and somewhat conflicting things to say. And I think it would be not unreasonable to say that some of the debate has actually reflected some pretty entrenched attitudes from different sides of the debate. I mentioned the question of balance between the implementation of recommendations which we made about the increase in access to UK-authored articles on the one hand, where there's been a lot of activity. RCUK policies, funding body consultations, tightening of welcome trust policies, and so on. A lot of activity in that territory. And lots of responses from publishers, from new enterprises, and so on, as a result of those policy initiatives. Much less activity around what we can do to improve access to the 94%, let me underscore it again, of articles where there is no UK authorship involved. But if you're outside the HE sector and big pharma and one or two other industries, your access to this material is very difficult and or very expensive. And that is not good for the research community. It is not good for UK society and the UK economy. And I think more attention needs to be paid to that. We're not going to get globally to an open access world next year. And so this issue still needs to be addressed. As I say, the pace of change has been quite fast. I think that has given rise to all kinds of complex issues. I think Stephen mentioned that it's very easy actually to set out the obvious principles on which we should base policy. But below those issues, a simple principle, there's a hell of a lot of very important second and third order issues that are quite complex to deal with, and I think we're still grappling with lots of those. And I think it's also true to say that the pace of change has meant that it's been quite difficult to keep all the players, all the learned societies, all the publishers, all universities, all researchers even all funders, talking to each other and acting in a coordinated way, and I'll say a bit more about that again in a moment. I think the green versus gold debate is hopelessly simplistic as a way of characterising the issues that we're dealing with. But it's very, very seductive to fall into the green versus gold kind of dichotomy. It clearly is true that there's been quite a lot of progress, although it's patchy as between universities, but certainly some fairly large-scale universities have made very significant progress in securing the deposit of full text articles in their institutional repositories. And that's a good thing. I think that there is still lots of debate about whether access to material via repositories with very short embargoes is the most effective way forward during a transition period characterised by the kind of mixed economy that I spoke about. It looks as if it might be a very cheap option. It might, on the other hand, if you have very short or some people advocate zero embargoes across the piece, that could put at risk some quite valuable elements in the current scholarly communications ecology, with effects that I think are quite difficult to predict. That is why some people would argue that gold, or some version of gold, is the most sustainable option. And within that, there are clearly issues to do with the position of hybrid journals. The House of Commons Biz Committee recommended that APC should not be paid to hybrid journals because of the so-called double dipping risk. The counter argument is that if you want researchers to publish in top journals of their choice at present on open access terms, then hybrid is probably in the interim a rather good way to do that. As I say, in the interim, in the short term, it also offers not a risk-free, but a less risky route for subscription-based journals that have been well established to make a move towards open access without having to flip their model overnight. So I think those arguments are still very much in play. And I think we still have very much an unresolved tension between the parts, the roles that green and gold play in the kind of mixed economy which Finch advocated. On funding and costs, I think Mary talked, and I think Stephen talked earlier about seeing publishing costs as an integral part of research costs. I think that is now widely recognised by funders. I think it is less well recognised, and I think the full implications of that have not been well thought through by all the other players in the system, including universities. And I think it has some quite difficult implications for universities in thinking about the extent to which they might need to put some funds that don't come from with an earmarking from bodies like RC UK, whether they need to put some other funds into the support of moves towards open access. And that's in an environment where there are still a whole host of uncertainties about what the costs to individual universities are likely to be during a transition period. We still don't have enough information about key issues like what is happening to average APC costs, what the long-term costs of repositories are likely to be, what the likely trade-offs are between different institutions in meeting open access costs for collaborative publications and so on. And the biggest issue of all, perhaps, is this question of the extent to which there can be trade-offs between subscription costs on the one hand and the costs of APCs on the other. Any transition is clearly going to involve an increase in costs. There is no transition of this kind of scale that can't involve an increase in costs. But we do need to find ways to limit it so that as universities are paying out more in APCs or more for their repositories, then they do see some control over subscription costs. And let me just make a point here about double dipping. I think this is a much bigger issue than hybrid journals and double dipping. Every time you pay an APC for one of the established fully open access journals, PLOS One, for example, the same issue arises. It's not just an issue to do with hybrid journals. Someone mentioned earlier international developments. There's been a hell of a lot of important developments across the world. The EU, the European Research Council already has strong open access policies. The policies for Horizon 2020 are now being finalised. Australia, Science Europe, the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the States, the Global Research Council, the G8 science ministers have all issued statements, roadmaps, and so on to get us towards open access. And the important thing here, I think, from a narrow UK perspective, is that the pace of change towards open access in the rest of the world has a direct impact on the cost as well as the pace of the transition within the UK. The more stuff that is available on open access terms globally, the more scope there is to reduce subscription costs. I won't say much about embargoes, except to say that there clearly is a question of balance between speed of access on the one hand and the risk to journals on the other. I think the position we've got to is one where there are some sticks and some carrots involved, and we might want to change the balance between the sticks and the carrots. I think there are also issues that we need to think about quite carefully around what are the principles, or if you like, putting it another way, what are the pieces of evidence that it's important to take into account when thinking about what are appropriate embargo periods. Is it the half-life of downloads and usage? Is it differences between disciplines and so on? And I think, in lots of the discussion, there is a particular point that's made about the sustainability of journals published by learned societies and the revenues that learned societies generate currently from their mainly subscription-based journals. I have to say that it seems to me that is an entirely separate, it's a critically important issue, but it's entirely separate from the issue of how we should set embargoes. Copyright and licenses, clearly there are continuing controversies about that. The only thing I would want to say is that I think we should guard against the risk that CC BY becomes a sort of a principle rather than a mechanism. I think the principle of there being free access as unrestricted as possible is more important than the particular license, which of course was generated for use in sectors quite outside the scholarly communications sector. There clearly are issues around feelings of loss of control, worries about commercial uses, worries about inappropriate derivatives, and so on. I think those can be resolved, but I don't think we should get too hung up, if I can speak personally, on a particular license in the form of CC BY or anything else. I have said that there has been relatively little progress on extensions to licensed access. The main initiative, which is going to be launched in a month or so's time, is that most publishers are going to provide walk-in access only, to the full range of their journals in public libraries. That bears an important and rather interesting implication for universities. You may find that the local public library will have, albeit on a single terminal in the library, access to a bigger range of journals than are available in the university library. Infrastructure, we need some more work on. I'm not going to say more about that, other than that interoperability has become a much bigger issue over the last year, I think, than it was before. But I think the biggest issue of all probably is coordination. I work for an organisation which has no public sector status at all. We are an independent consultancy that happens to have been quite involved in the Finch process. And we have done some work in trying to keep the dialogue going between the different players in the scholarly communication system, to keep them talking about issues such as how do we monitor progress in the transition towards OA over an extended period in an agreed way. But there's a whole host of issues, as I've mentioned already, second, third order implementation issues, issues about the data available on particular aspects of policy, where there is a lot of further work to be done that needs to be done in coordination between the different players in the system. Funders, universities, learned societies, publishers, researchers themselves, none of them can deliver what we want to deliver on their own. They all have important roles to play in this kind of jigsaw, and we run the risk at the moment that they're talking across each other, that they're doing things that don't coordinate, that don't lead to interoperability, that rub up against each other in all kinds of unhelpful ways. And it seems to me that it's absolutely critical as we move forward over the next year or so that we try to get a more coordinated and a more formally coordinated approach than perhaps we've had over the past year. But that's the end of my peroration. I'd be very happy to answer questions.
So I'm looking for people in the back row to exercise the microphone. Do we have any questions or comments for Michael?
Thank you for that. We were just wondering about this idea of disinterested coordination. Disinterested is kind of a loaded term. Do you mean private sector, or do you mean government? What precisely do you mean by disinterested coordination?
What I meant is that we need to have some kind of structure, some kind of formal structure, which provides a mechanism, if you like, through which which representatives of all the different players can keep the show on the road in a coordinated way to ensure that they don't rub up against each other, as I say, in unhelpful ways, which are going to cause problems rather than solutions. No single player is disinterested.
Doesn't quite answer precisely what I mean. I think what I'm trying to get at is how you begin to form a disinterested body. If you are expecting someone to be entirely detached, how you do that, and whether or not you're suggesting that private sector organisations like your own are probably the ones that are best served in doing that.
No, I'm not suggesting any particular organisation at all. I'm certainly not pitching for business for my organisation. In fact, I think that one of the problems over the last year has been that essentially it's been left to one or two organisations like the RIN to try to manoeuvre the different parties together, and I don't think that's an appropriate mechanism.
So I have a question about, you made what I think is a really important point, that lots of progress is being made in the making UK research available, but less so in getting availability to the whole of research. Now, my analysis of that would be that the people who are able to take action, primarily funders, and our locus of activity is on things that are done in the UK, and that the limitation is that the locus of activity globally is much more with the publishing industry, actually, and that's where progress has been more slow. Would you agree with my analysis of the situation, and what can we do about it?
Well, I agree in part, and I mean, let's recognise that the publishers are through the Public Library Initiative doing something which I think is quite significant. Let's not overplay it. It is only walk-in access, with some restrictions on downloading and reuse rights and so on. But they have done something that's reasonably significant and which doesn't exist, as far as I'm aware, anywhere else in the world. The Finch Group recommendation was that government should put some money into the extension of licences, which could be done in a number of different ways. I know that JISC is trying to put together a pilot under which, for example, universities would, through their Nestle 2 licences, be able to provide access to everyone in the NHS in their locality, and I think that could be quite useful, because any librarian certainly will tell you that the complications in the licensed access regimes for the same people in some cases who have both an NHS and a university affiliation are a nightmare, and there is some sorting out that needs to be done there. The same kind of approach could perhaps be taken in terms of extending university licensed access to some SMEs in the locality. And again, behind the scenes there is talk about setting up some pilots for that, but progress has been painfully slow, and we're not going to see much visible progress for some months to come. I think it is going to be an important issue for government. I mean, if government wants to see some of the gains which they hope will come from open access globally, if they're going to see those in the short term, they're going to have to put some money into extensions to licensing outside the HE sector. Some pump priming or something. I'm not suggesting that they should provide free access to every SME, pay licenses to Elsevier or something for free access to SMEs for ever and a day. But putting some pump priming money in for pilots and so on, I think could achieve some really important gains.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Michael. So I think we're hearing just quite how ferociously complicated this whole environment and issue is. The final part of our programme today is an opportunity to invite to the podium Professor Julia Goodfellow, who is the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Kent. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to you all. I had hoping you'd have sorted it all out by now, having been sat in this room for how many hours? 3 hours. Oh, whatever. I'm not quite certain why I was invited. Originally, I was told I was meant to sum up, but those of you with good eyesight will notice I crept in at the back and walked down the side. I didn't hear some of the earlier talks. I thought it was because perhaps people wanted me to know, as Vice-Chancellor, that open access exists and it was an issue. But I have to disillusion you. I, in another incarnation 10 years ago, was working with research councils on open access, and do remember going to see my American counterparts in America who were suffering through the same sorts of debates. And I think I agree with our last speaker. Possibly not that much has moved on, though there is some progress there. We're still far from having a system, a really vibrant system. Perhaps my one comment would be academia is at its most successful when you let academics run it. At the moment, a lot of the steer for academia is coming, from funders, and that doesn't always work, and the funders actually know they have to get ownership by academic community, and I would say in my own area, in terms of data access, structural and molecular biology has been at the forefront for the last 50 or 60 years in putting data in the public domain. And it is now an international effort with the European Bioinformatics Institute in the UK, run by one of my colleagues for the last 10 years. And we run as a community, and this data goes in, and it is funded by the community and owned by a community of scholars. And I think that is a really important message for us. I actually think that the principles of open access are quite laudable. We get government funding. I've always believed if we have access to taxpayers' money, then we have a duty to put our research in the public domain. And I think it is sensible, especially in these days of impact and even before that we want the widest possible audience to read, digest and debate our work. However, there are issues for the academy, for individual academics, for higher education, research institutions, all learned societies, and I think we've heard a lot about these this afternoon. However, we cannot afford to put our heads in the sand. We have to debate and discuss even complex issues such as those we've heard this afternoon. I think my final thing should be to thank everybody. I would like to thank Research Services for organising this wonderful event. Thanks very much, Simon and colleagues. It's very useful as part of the debate. Thank those of you who've attended from the university. But a special thanks obviously go to our visitors, and we're very grateful to Stephen Hall from HEFC, Murray Williams from BBSRC, Caroline Edwards from Birkbeck, Kevin Ashley from Digital Creation Centre, and Michael Jubb, Research Information Network, and of course our very own, I haven't forgotten you, Rosemary, our very own Rosemary Hunter. She's just gossiping, I've forgotten she's here. I did actually take the opportunity to meet them earlier before this started. So in conclusion, I really hope you've got something positive to take back from today. I think that we, as individual academics and as an institution, do have to grasp the potential of open access and, like everybody else, see how we evolve through this very complex landscape. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.